What if the next big Marvel revelation isn't a superhero, but the family member of one of comics' most enigmatic creators? Tonight, Mark Ditko, Steve Ditko's nephew, is stepping into the spotlight on the Experience livestream, and it's a moment that feels like a time capsule being cracked open. Steve Ditko, the man who co-created Spider-Man and Mr. A, has always been a ghost in the machine, a genius who preferred his art to speak for itself, not his personality. But now, with a new Spider-Man movie dubbed the most Ditko-est on screen and a documentary streaming globally, the world is finally asking, what did Steve Ditko really believe? And who gets to tell his story? Mark's appearance isn't just a family reunion, it's a cultural reckoning. For years, Steve Ditko's legacy was filtered through rumors, myths, and the occasional interview where he'd vanish into silence. But Mark, who only discovered his uncle's fame in the 90s, has become a bridge between the man behind the pen and the public's obsession with his work. Personally, I think this is fascinating because it highlights how often we conflate a creator's output with their inner life. Steve Ditko's art was revolutionary, but his personal philosophy, his beliefs about freedom, responsibility, and the role of the artist, has been buried under layers of speculation. What makes this really interesting is that Mark isn't here to sell a narrative, he's here to challenge the ones we've already built. Take the documentary, Steve Ditko, Beyond the Myth. It's not just a tribute, it's a correction. The film features scholars, colleagues, and even Mark himself, all pushing back against the caricature of Ditko as a reclusive curmudgeon. From my perspective, this feels like a necessary act of resistance. For decades, Ditko's work was celebrated, but his humanity was sidelined. Now, with his death in 2018, there's a push to reclaim his voice. But here's the thing, Mark isn't just preserving history, he's shaping it. When he wrote the foreword for Ditko Shrugged, he wasn't just honoring his uncle, he was curating the story. And that raises a deeper question: who gets to decide what a creator's legacy is, especially when they're no longer around to say? And let's talk about the merch. The stream is selling original art pages from Spider-Man's history, but none by Steve Ditko. It's a cruel irony, really. The man who gave us Spider-Man's iconic look is being excluded from the very artifacts that celebrate him. What many people don't realize is that Ditko's visual style was so distinct that even modern artists like John Romita Jr. and Mark Bagley have had to reinterpret his DNA. It's like trying to capture the sound of a jazz riff without knowing the musician's name. A detail I find fascinating is how the art market is profiting from Ditko's legacy while his family navigates the tension between reverence and commercialization. Is this celebration, or is it exploitation? I'm not sure, but it's a conversation worth having. Mark's journey, from a New York kid sketching for his uncle to a curator of his legacy, feels like a microcosm of how we remember creators today. We're obsessed with their work, but we're terrified of their contradictions. Steve Ditko was a libertarian philosopher who drew some of the most emotionally resonant comics in history. That duality is what makes him compelling, but also what makes his story so hard to pin down. If you take a step back and think about it, this isn't just about one man's life, it's about how we choose to memorialize the people who shape our culture. Will we remember Steve Ditko as the man who created Spider-Man, or as the man who refused to let his art be reduced to a brand? The answer might depend on who's telling the story, and whether they're willing to listen to the one who knew him best.